de-wobbling is very important in many different industries.
Yeah. And Beth just de-wobbled the phone. Welcome to Tuesday at 7. As we try to be punctual and go live a few minutes before, so you have the opportunity to share. You guys want to share out?
Yeah, I'm going to share out right now.
All right, so we're going to have small talk here for a few minutes. Thank you guys for joining us as people are watching. Just de-wobbled the phone.
Oops.
Welcome to Tuesday. Yeah, there's the.
I didn't mean to do that. Okay, there we go.
Oh,
Deja vu.
Yeah, there's the delay, but at any rate, thank you for joining us. As folks have been joining, we have been all over the place talking with some great creatives. And today we're going to visit with Jeremiah and Andrea and talk about Circus life. But we have a few minutes. I know that there's people signing on. We're going to be giving away some comic books from Ted Sikora. We have 3 sets of 2, and we'll go through that. We'll do that on the front end of our interview, because I know that there's some folks that have thrown their names in that are going to want to see the draw at the very beginning, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk, and it's going to be a conversation. Remember, folks, hopefully that you're joining us live, and if you are, that means that you can participate with us. What was that?
Mindy.
Oh, Mindy, how are you? Mindy, I did get your name in the drawing, so your name is one of. You got pretty good odds. I mean, there's a number of names here, but you saw pretty good odds of winning one of these pairs of comics.
Drum roll.
Yeah, yeah. But
Glenn Gilmore.
Glenn, how are you doing? I'm glad that you're doing well. Again, this is live, and those who participate live can jump in and ask some questions. If you ask a question, we'll jump in there, because if we're in the middle of a story or some questions here, we're going to bounce back and take some questions from some folks along the way. All right. And it looks like we're pretty close to 7 o'clock.
1 minute.
1 minute. We're
Maybe
going to be
less.
punctual at 7. So you guys drove in from Toledo today, right? After today, you're going to be, or after we interview and grab something to eat afterward, are you going back to Toledo?
We're going to go back to Toledo, and then tomorrow we're going to go to Fremont, Ohio, and we're going to celebrate Harold McCall, Basho, his birthday bash, since we can't go to the other birthday party that is planned in the later week.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then from there, back to Toledo, or are you going to be doing some laundering? Because you're just off a really busy season, right?
Yes, we got lots of laundry, lots of preparation on our RV to repair some things to make sure it's good for when we go down the road again.
Yeah, yeah. What's next stop here?
Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio.
Hopefully we'll get the motorhome back on Friday and be on our way Monday to Columbus. And then our friend Chico the Clown is in Waynesville, Ohio, for a fair that we'd like to visit for a couple of days.
I am interested in hearing more about Chico the Clown, and we're gonna come back to that.
Yeah.
But since we're at 7, and there's probably some folks joining in now, we're gonna do the drawing. If you remember, if the artists have something to give away, that we usually give that away 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago, we interviewed with Ted Sikora from Hero Tomorrow Comics. We also watched Beth and I watched his DVD, and great movie. And he talked about that in the interview as well. But he provided 6 autographed copies of his comic, and maybe we're going to start off by giving this number 5 issue. Again, this was that one individual. This is that one costume that was there in his studio.
Yep.
And Tap Dance Killer issue number 3. So with that, I'm going to ask Andrea, just choose a name.
Oh, here she
Pressure's
goes.
on.
Yep.
Well, then you gotta toss it up.
Alright. We're going to bring it in. Am I too close?
No.
Two great issues. Bring it
There
on
you go.
down.
Yep.
Alright. So, first set goes to Deb Sherrill.
Again.
Deb
Oh,
Sherrill.
Deb.
She won 3 weeks ago for
She
a
did.
yeah
The
for
stained
a,
glass, I think.
Yeah. I'm gonna place this over here so they don't get mixed up. Deb.
She's a sharing
Congratulations.
machine.
I don't know if she's there or not.
Very good.
I don't see her yet. I don't think.
All right, this one, I think this one is extra special because this is the very first issue of Apama. And I believe this is the I don't even know that you can buy this even online, so I think this is kind of a collectible one. And then issue number 1 and issue number 2, Jeremiah.
Here we go.
Yeah, if you want to open it up and...
Ted
give us a
Sikora
peek.
just came on.
Hey, Ted, how are you?
The creator of Apama,
Hey,
Tap
Ted.
Dance Killer.
Yeah.
Adrian Pogozelski.
Pogo,
Nice.
Adrian. Hey, Ted, was
She's
this...
watching right now too. Adrian, you won.
Fantastic.
Congratulations. Ted, if you could tell us, is this like a limited edition cover? This is the very first one. We'd be interested in hearing that as we draw the third winner. Again, this is Apama 1 and Apama issue 2.
There you go.
Right, there we go. And Adrian Pogo,
Yay.
you got this the second set. All right, we're going to do the very last drawing. This is Tap Dance Killer, issue 1 and issue 2, third giveaway. Thank you all for sharing the video.
Ted says that was a variant cover, con exclusive. So
Ooh, Adrian,
Yep.
you got
Yep.
that one.
she got the right one.
Yeah, and Andrea. All right, very last one. This is Southtown Makers. So this is, we will go back to the person who is in charge of this website. And Ted, you might know who Southtown Makers is, but we will make sure that this issue 1 and issue 2 gets to you. Thank you all for sharing. But as we dig in, oh, you guys remember last week we
Oh yeah.
had the Mummy and the Monkey, right? We're giving this away next week, so if you share last week's episode, and there's a lot of shares, a lot of views there, we're going to go ahead and give this t-shirt away next week. But we're not here to talk about the past. We're here to talk about tonight. And I'm going to start off by asking you both a question, but I'm going to start with Andrea, and that is, did you ever threaten your loved ones with running away to join the circus?
Oh, many a time. Yes. Well, it started with the wicked clowns, which I wanted to do professional clowning also. So they weren't together, but I thought that clowning was being a cartoon version of yourself, and I knew that people, whether if they're good or bad, could be wicked or not wicked. So anyway, I enjoyed the music, all in entertainment, and I loved theater and performing, so I could see the beauty of how the two blended together. So I did family entertainment and I did haunting, and that's how I threatened my family with joining the circus.
And if you're like, if things don't go well, I'm leaving home and joining the circus.
Very
I like
true.
it.
And a pie throwing as well.
Oh,
I
Jeremiah.
like it.
My parents threatened to sell me to the circus, but then they'd follow it up with they'd have to pay them to take me. Yeah, I didn't know anything about the circus until I joined Lewis and Clark in 2010, and that was just a chance thing that I heard about along the way.
So yeah, so very early on, it was just, you know, they were threatening to sell you to the circus. Little do they know that you join one day. But both take me back. I'm going to go to Jeremiah, so while we're here. Back to your childhood, were there some things where you're like, you know what, I'm just kind of destined for a creative, wandering, adventurous life?
Absolutely. I stared out the window of school every single day wanting to be anywhere else than where I was. And as I went through high school and took advanced placement classes, and I was a straight D student, I would do no homework whatsoever. I would tell all my classes how I was not going to college and how I could not wait to get a job doing manual labor and just working with my hands and making decisions of who I wanted to be and where I was. And my parents inspired every part of that. They told me every day if I worked hard that I was going to do well. And that's what I couldn't wait to get started on.
So you threw the hat at graduation. You're like, I'm out of here, and off you went.
I didn't even show up to throw a hat at graduation. I was already gone. I came back to get my diploma, and I was darn glad of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Andrea, how about you? So back to your childhood, kind of those creative glimpses early on.
I worked really well with children. And again, I really liked theater, and I did choir, and I wanted to learn everything that was available and what I couldn't even see in the distance. And boy, I love Toledo very much because I grew up in it, but I was so thrilled to get out and go and see and do and be as much as I could, and just see what was available, and how much I've learned from town to town, not even state to state or even further, how drastically different each one is, and how much of a blessing it is. And you know, you just throw a dart and you'll get a little closer to wherever you want to make your final destination.
So where you belong.
Yep,
so
where you belong.
Toledo is where you were born and raised.
Correct.
And Jeremiah?
Tomball, Texas, just outside of Houston.
So Texas, Toledo. I'm not going to ask how you come together because I think that we'll learn that along the way.
Yes.
So where did Circus start? So what year? Who was first in?
Right here.
Okay.
Yep. I left Texas at the end of 2009 after graduating out of high school for a little over a year. I worked at a moving company and delivered pizzas for Papa John's. And I went to Colorado to be a wildland firefighter. I looked up all the information online. I decided that's what would get me out in the country, out exploring America. And after having taken those classes in the Gunnison and Salida mountain ranges for the Colorado Fire Camp, I lived in Boulder, Colorado for 3 months. I had come across this man named Tim Hurd, who was from Maryland and who had worked with the Lewis and Clark Circus down in Easley, South Carolina. And I followed his advice. He said if I wanted to travel and put sun on my skin, that joining the circus was the thing to do. So I packed up everything into my little Toyota pickup truck, and I traveled the country down to Easley, South Carolina, and I joined Lewis and Clark Circus in 2010 in March.
So did they know you were coming, or are you just like, I'm going?
No, I called them up. Their only question to me was, do you have a driver's license? Boy, they were thrilled to pieces when I said yes. Yep, they promised me $210 a week, and after taxes, that comes out to $175. 3 meals a day and a place to sleep at night, and they did not fail. They followed through on each one of those. My place to sleep at night was in a little cubby hole in a box trailer made of Tetris blocks that became people's rooms. And my meals every day were served on great value styrofoam plates, and when you tilted it to the side, half the water would run off of it, and had its fair share of high-protein dog hair and flies buzzing around it.
But you weren't there for the food or the.
No, I was there to
Cubby
work
hole?
circus, and sure enough, I swung a sledgehammer. I helped take care of a camel, a pony, and a horse, and trained goats. I worked with the tent crew. The performers were fantastic. They all treated me very nice. It was just the bare necessities that I had to come to grips with. It was a dusty old show, and the characters there were each cut out of their own comic books. And I specifically remember the Ayala family, and Gary Sladek, and Rebecca Ostroff, who I'd go on to work with for years afterwards. That show, I became the animal handler, and I was Huckleberry Cook with his trained goats. and his trained camel. And I'd take care of the animals, and I'd do camel rides out on the midway. And every last little bit of it I fought for. And learned lots about driving the truck and taking care of myself and taking care of all those responsibilities.
You're how old?
I was 19 when I got started
when you
with
first
that.
joined the circus.
Yep, I was 20 when I was done with that season. And at the end of that season, I had a link to a bigger circus through Brian LaPalme. And Rebecca Ostroff and Richie Deptula helped me with that link over there, where they offered for me to be the purchasing agent, the cook's assistant, and drive one of the trucks for the show. They would help me get my Class B and then my Class A CDL with an old man sitting in the passenger seat of these big trucks, slapping me on the chest and telling me to get my foot off the clutch. That cost the circus money. Yeah, and even that old man, Dana and Rita Fulton, we'd wind up working with. Yeah, over on Carson and Barnes Circus. But for right now, we were on Kelly Miller. And when I started that show, at that point, I thought I had known what Circus was. Lewis and Clark was 24 man strong and had a tent that seated about 500 or 600 people in a single ring in there. Kelly Miller was a 1,200 person tent and hired over 100 people at the time. Brian LaPalme was the chef on that show who showed me how to cook and taught me the basics of how to be in circus and market myself. That man taught me how to be a fire eater also. And throughout the season, we would do our fire eating act and cook there in the kitchen. Eventually it'd become my kitchen, and I would work that for the following 5 seasons, while also learning how to handle elephants with Armando Loyal. And with all my friends, Jacob and Jason, the tent crew workers, Mr. John Ringling North II, who owned the show at the time, and Danny and Tavana Brown, who were the office managers that made the entire operation run.
Tell me about, and I have been to the circus, and I've been to tent circus, but tell me this is just a complete side question for me. There seems to be, if I'm trying to put myself in the place of the process of creating a show, a circus, experience, there's probably, I don't even want to start here because there's probably a process of actually finding a location, driving these trucks in, finding the right space, cutting down trees so you can get trucks in. But tell me about erecting the tent, staking, lifting that tent. Is that the beginning of this is where we're going to be for the next 24, 48 hours? No, it would usually start 6 months in advance at least, and even a year before that if they had a really good booking agent. Yeah.
Someone has to go out there and see that there's enough land for all the equipment to make it on there, that the semi-trucks would actually fit, that there's ample provision of power and water and dumpster facilities. Some of these shows would bring their own...
all the proper sponsorship and permits and everything that to do it correctly.
Yeah, it was a long and drawn-out process. That was greatly helped by having people there in town helping the circus get in there, because the morning that the day before the truck showed up, our 24-hour man would be on the grounds measuring out how the tent is going to set up and where everybody's going to be parked around it. And the day of, when the first truck showed up, every truck came in after it, and before you knew it, you had a whole tent city and all this heavy equipment. And there was nowhere else for it to go. And periodically, you'd run into a situation where it had been raining for weeks on end before we got there, and they needed a paved lot for us to set up on so it wasn't just a huge sloppy mess.
Yeah.
And I believe the words Tavana would use with the sponsor is...
if things do not go... you say
according to plan.
According to plan, then the lot could be unrecognizable.
We would turn whole city parks into absolute mud holes with all the semi trucks and heavy equipment. And
the
all
school ball fields that were lush and green and picturesque. And, you know, no matter how delicately we tried to tiptoe off the lot, it was good.
And heavy equipment if it's a messy weather, huh?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
very clever people at the head of all of it who knew how to get all this stuff going. Because at 5 o'clock the next morning, it needs to be on its way to the next town.
Oh, so was it usually one day and then gone?
Absolutely.
Yep, and they don't call it a mud show for nothing.
Oh.
Yeah.
But a good rain meant good luck, at least in the spring.
It was
Good
always
turnout.
raining through the spring.
Okay.
So tell us. One day you transitioned to the Kelly Miller Circus, right? So we're going back there.
Right, yeah. So now it's 2011. And I am Brian LaPalme's right-hand man in the kitchen. And we're feeding 106 people breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I go to the grocery store and I do the shopping for him. And he shows me all the techniques that he uses to ensure that everybody's got ample food, that everybody's catered to, that you have enough time to get your makeup on to go in and go breathe some fire to finish the show out.
And within budget.
Within
budget.
within budget.
So you're driving the truck, right? You're driving the truck. You learn how to drive. You get your CDL. You're driving this giant semi in. You're unloading quickly because you've got the show that evening.
Yep.
Before you pack up and go back, you're going to the store. You're cooking for 100 people, and then you're breathing fire, and then probably doing some animal.
Yeah,
movement in
you
between?
know, and every year brought a different list of chores. That first year, I was helping Brian LaPalme out. We were doing our fire eating act. The second year, they hired a different set of cooks. I started out working it, but then the second set of cooks came in. And at that same time, the elephant handler at the time, Mr. Armando Loyal and his beautiful family, they lost their groom, Buckner. And they asked the circus, can I have this free set of hands to come help me with my animals? And at that point, remember on Lewis and Clark, I'd had that camel and those horses and those goats. At least I had some kind of animal experience. And so I would go on to help Armando with these elephants, doing elephant rides in the act. And he would show me how to handle these elephants with positive reinforcement and how to do it all correctly and put those animals first too. And the pain that was involved in operating in the midst of all these activists and protesters who were proclaiming that we were in the wrong the entire time. And I don't want this interview to devolve to that, because I could argue my point all night long.
But those animals are well cared for.
Those animals
Absolutely.
were well cared for, and we figured out who did not provide those care for other animals.
And
we would
never
steer clear of
supported
those
them,
people.
and we went to everyone that cared very much for the wellness of the animals, the people, and the show itself.
Right. So the year after I worked with Armando in 2012 and 13, I would be the full-time cook again.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be the show's generally useful. Periodically, they needed someone to drive the truck in the middle of the night, or an extra set of hands to help set up the tent, or be an electrician or a mechanic. And I would fulfill these roles. I would go into town and find parts for trucks and talk to people and get propane for the circus. A lot of people on the show would have shellfish allergies, or they would try to be gluten-free, and they would try real hard to adhere to diets, and I would try really hard to help them out with it.
The showgirls need to stay thin.
The showgirls needed to stay thin, and Brian LaPalme had taught me a very Julia Child style of cooking that involved butter with every meal. And Mr. North was super generous into the extreme. He didn't want to see pork and turkey hot dogs on his circus. If we were going to have hot dogs for a meal, he wanted beef hot
Yes.
dogs.
Hot dogs.
He wanted everybody to have as much food as they could eat. It was the complete antithesis of what I experienced in the past on those great value styrofoam plates. And I wanted to do better than anybody before me. And I wanted to take everything that I was learning and push it even further. Those people on that circus would yell and scream, and it felt like I was Shirley the circus whipping boy at the time. And I would make mistakes, but I got to enjoy myself, and I got to learn a lot that would provide for us in years past now.
Yeah, so for those folks who are joining, we're talking about circus life with Jeremiah and Andrea, and we're getting some background into where it began. And I know that Beth has given me a couple signals. You got a question? Some people joining?
And again, this is going to kind of go in and out of what you're talking about.
Okay.
Adrian Pogo, who is one of our winners, asked if you have a favorite place to go, like when you're touring with the circus. Where is your fave place to land?
So one of the hardest things has been to remember the names of these towns. Right?
Well, the funny thing about it is we talked about Ohio, and you says we came through Ohio, and you named like six
towns around the Cleveland area that we've been to.
Well, then name those off first of all to start off.
So when we come around the Cleveland area, you know, we start off at Conneaut, Ohio, up by the Great Lakes. We drop down to Middlefield and go over to Sheffield Lake and Aurora, Massillon, Minerva,
Millersburg. Well, probably not yet.
Well, in earlier that year, we would have gone through the southern part of the state, Millersburg and Mount Hope. And there's a dozen towns that I do not remember. And I did not, every morning you'd get into your truck, you wouldn't know where you were going. You never paid that much attention. But there's a piece of paper slip on the dashboard of your truck that gives you written instructions of where you're going next.
And no matter what, follow the arrows. But you train yourself to see the arrows after a while.
So Ohio, I mean, you were all over Ohio. So what others?
New Freedom, Pennsylvania.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
Well, we would start in Brownsville, Texas. And we'd make our way up to Oklahoma and through Arkansas and Missouri and Indiana and Illinois and Ohio, then over to Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New Jersey, in upper New York State and New Hampshire, and then we'd make our way west again, and we'd trace across those Great Lakes, and we'd make our way back through Pennsylvania and Ohio and Illinois and over to the Chicago area, and make our way back down to Oklahoma. And throughout our journeys, we would regularly interact with the Circus Fans of America, who would come and build enormous spreads for the circus. And at the time, I know, right off the top of my head, Hancock, Maryland, there would be the John Ringling and Stephen Ryan tent that would come through and set up an enormous Memorial Day feast for us. It was just around the same time that we were in Hancock, Maryland. And we would take the cookhouse area where everybody would get their meals and eat. We had picnic tables and a big tent set up for the whole operation.
Lots of patriotic, festive decorations.
They would decorate it and bring fried chicken and all kinds of goodies and desserts and gift packages and t-shirts for everybody. And towns that would have their big town festival would have leftover t-shirts that they didn't sell. And they would hold on to these mementos, and when the circus would come through, they'd set up a big booth where they would actually hand clothes off to the circus and extra food and stuff. And those were the times that were our favorites. It was those little niceties that people wouldn't think of. That was a huge breath of fresh air.
People that were so happy to see us and would invite us again time and time, and really spend time. We would pour our heart and soul, not just in the shows, but before and after. We'd get to spend quality time with the community, which was always our favorite thing, was going and seeing where we really were and digging into that. And because each and every town and person were so special and individual in their own.
So that was, Andrea, so that was 2000.
So, yeah, these are in the years of from 2011 to 2017. But these same spots would still be our favorites to go to. That these people would have spreads to provide to us as we came in. We drive our semi-truck and park there, and there's a whole table filled with donuts and hot coffee and chocolate milk, as if I hadn't offered almost the same thing before we started driving from the cookhouse. Yeah. And
or they would bring, fresh market items, zucchini and cucumber and carrots and potatoes that, you know, we would get. But more so, everybody was very excited to come and feed the elephants and spoil them as if they don't need to be spoiled more. They were very happy pets.
Was there anything else before we kind of jump back?
JD Andrews is watching.
Oh.
Want to say hi to JD.
Hey guys, how you doing?
And Caitlin.
Kim, I know that you often watch as well.
Caitlin is on. Dave Duarte, Ron Rock. Adrian Pogo also asked, have you ever had a mom or a dad try to sell you their kids?
I've had many opportunity while I would see a very rotten child while I was selling, you know, show tickets. And I would always make the suggestion, you know, oh, we can just sweep them away. They fit in all the small crevices. And they'd be like, well, you don't even have to buy them. I'll give them to you. Just open your door.
There you go.
When you're deflating the moon bounce or a bounce slide, the kids never want to get off of it. So you tell them, oh, we're going to roll you up in this and you're going to bring us with the circus. And I remember one time when a kid asked, did that ever happen? And I looked at the parents. I tried real hard to shed a tear as I said, only once.
My daughter says she remembers me threatening to sell her to the circus a few times, and that might
there you go, just like you.
That might be
circus.
Accurate. And Stacy Smith says, "Hey, bro."
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, I know her. She grew up with me there in Tomball. That's Big Bob White's little sister.
Yay!
We're glad you joined us today. So we're talking with Jeremiah and Andrea, Circus Life, creative conversation. Jeremiah shared where he stepped in, and then all of a sudden, with the Kelly Miller Circus, were they connected to larger shows, or like, I mean, in the larger scope of things? And I see Andrea nodding. So, if you think about circuses, how are they connected? Are they
branched off?
Yeah, are they descendants of...
Some of these shows will share the same owner.
Okay.
So Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey had 2 units, right?
Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. The two.
As I understand it, Kelly Miller Circus used to be a branch of the Carson and Barnes Circus a long time ago. That eventually acquired its own owners, and then it was its own thing. Most circuses do not have any real branch to each other. They will promote each other sometimes. They try real hard to be in different parts of the country. They try real hard not to play the same town or the same fair at the same time. I don't see a lot of elbows being thrown. It's kind of bad juju to speak bad of somebody else's operation, just in case everybody thinks what you're saying is true about your own.
And not to mention, I would imagine that, you know, you have performers from one sometimes move to
all the time.
All the time.
Oh, it's a tight-knit community. As soon as you need someone doing a specific job, everybody's on Facebook, or they've got their friends and networks to find, I need this skill out of somebody.
Right, and it's a very family knit business, and so, you know, even though you might have small groups here or there, everybody gets to know each other, and who knows, you might just marry another member of the family, so you better speak well.
Speaking of, Stacy Smith said, FYI, Tammy is getting married on the 13th this month.
Oh, hooray! That's her younger sister. Congratulations!
All right, congratulations, Tammy.
So talk about
Beth Turner says,
hey, Beth, how you doing?
Yeah.
Good to see you. And we were all up at the Haunted Hydro just this past weekend.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, we were.
Congratulations on your 30th year, Beth and Hydro family.
Yep.
And you were saying you just never know whether you'd marry somebody from the circus. So, and I understand you guys are engaged to be married. So, congratulations,
Thank
because
you very much.
you found love at the circus,
yes,
right?
We did.
So, and we may jump around here, but my mind is kind of a train, and you're in the Kelly Miller Circus, and to me that sounds like it's that's a place to be. And then how does, I mean,
Well,
yeah.
right now we're at 2013, right?
Okay.
And I'm doing the cooking, and I'm generally useful in 2014, and then we're going into 2015. I'm still doing that same job, right? And it's all the magic's kind of
You're
worn
doing
off.
everything, really.
The paint is kind of worn thin. And that's when I started talking to Andrea on Facebook.
Oh.
On Facebook.
And that's where we're going to let Andrea tell her of her experience on the
So
circus.
you ran across country to join the circus. So yeah, tell us.
Right, and I always wanted to join the circus. I wanted to be a professional clown. So when I was in Toledo, I did lots of different training, and I did everything from the birthday clown, the parade, I did a very challenging job of entertaining elders with dementia, which was the hardest thing I've ever done, is interacting with them. And I learned a lot from engaging with them and how to engage them. And I had met a clown that worked on Kelly Miller 10 years prior, before I met Jeremiah. And I went to see the mud show, and I visited him and contacted him periodically, just here and there. Hello, especially with social media. And so I was auditioning for Ringling Brothers Clown College. And that was a 3-step process at the time. And I did it in Chicago, and I did well, but I didn't make it to the official. So I went down to St. Louis the next year. And I kind of had a lay of the land of how they auditioned and what the expectations were. And so I had a little more of a game plan with that. And I got there, and I did really well. And after the audition, they were like, oh, come and see the circus school. We were at the City Museum. And I was like, this is a circus school? What? So they took us in the back, and we saw just walls of unicycles hanging, and hula hoops, and people were juggling and just milling around and warming up and stretching. And I found that it was a school for all ages. And so right then I was like, well, if I don't make it to the Ringling Clown College, to their boot camp at the time, I'm going to come here and I'm going to study. And so that's exactly what I did. I moved from Toledo, and I moved everything down, and I went for one weekend, and I said to my mother, I said, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to get an apartment, and I'm going to enroll in school. She's like, okay.
Now, how old were you?
At that time, I was 27.
Okay.
I had been working and doing clowning and theater from 18 to that time. And I went down and I did exactly that. And I was like, I'm going to join on this date. And I got a job, and I did school full time. And after about 6 months of training and working very hard, I knew that I needed to go and interact with people. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So with social media, I was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to find out who's in town. Who do I know? Who's willing to give me a shot?
Who breathes fire and
Who breathes fire?
Who can cook for me?
And that never happened. But I found that my clown friend at the time was mutual friends with Jeremiah. And I was like, oh, well, all right, let me just try. So I tinker and I say, oh, hello, Jeremiah. I see that the circus is 2 hours away, which is within rock throwing distance in my book. So may I come and see a real mud show and maybe get to see behind the scenes of how life really is. And what did you say?
We're serving taco salad today. I'd be happy to have you join us.
Oh, good. So, yeah, so I went, which was incredibly unusual. I never usually would go spend a 2-hour drive each way and meet a mysterious man.
Yeah.
But But in the end, when I first met him, I had a little token. I had some little cupcakes that I made at the time. And I was in the cookhouse where Jeremiah was preparing his meals. And he reached in my back pocket, thinking that he was very feisty. And what did you pull out?
I pulled out a pocket knife.
It was a big one.
There you go.
And I was like, oh, and he, what you gonna do with that? And he's like, I'm gonna put it right back with a firm pat.
There you go.
And
I'm just going to give you a taco salad.
Yes, and it was a very good day. We got to watch the show. We became really good friends, and here we are. It's
I pushed you over that chain link fence and ripped your pants, and then we went to Huddle House with Friedman Torales and Emily Dean and my brother Christian Cook.
Oh,
it was fantastic. We had
Everybody
so
loved
much fun.
those pants, by the way, and he made sure
He ruined them.
to ruin them.
So,
It's in the little things.
So circus school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you learned what was the things that you learned there? I mean, because we shared pictures of you riding an elephant. Did you ride probably not an elephant?
Well,
there,
originally I did. The beauty of clowning is that you can do anything, and incorporate it into clowning. So I did all the typical things. I did juggling, and I did unicycle. I did hula hoop. I did some flexibility, some basic flexibility, and I did an aerial class just for fun with a group of people, and it was various different props of aerial. That's all the same fundamentals, but all the same concept. And I was already very strong at that time with doing handstands, and I did some tumbling as well. And when I spoke to Jeremiah, I was like, hey, I want to be a clown. He's like, that job is already taken on this show, because it's very family oriented. There was 5th generation family, the son was doing it, and anyway, it wasn't likely for me to at least walk into that position. So he's like, well, ladies normally do showgirl and aerial work. And I was like, well, all right, if that's what I have to do things professionally and to get my foot in the door, tell me what I got to do. So he told me I needed to learn Spanish web and a list of other things, and the school I was working for firmly was against it. They're like, oh, if you do that, you'll never be a clown, you'll never amount to what you want to do. And I'm like, well, I'm not accepting that answer, because these people that I'm talking to are busy living the dream. They're doing it. So as much as I respected their warning, I was like, I'm gonna make a jab at it, because instead of, being in a stagnant spot, I want to go and be moving and traveling. So I spent the extra money for some private lessons and learned everything I could, which was about a 2-week process. And I filmed my 3 to 5 minute act and put it in for hire, and I was hired immediately. So I collected all my things and moved everything from St. Louis back to Toledo. Made sure that I had everything buttoned up, a 2-week notice, and tuition was fully paid. And as soon as I hit the soil of Toledo, I dropped everything off and tucked it away and joined the circus.
Now, so you guys were talking through this process, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying, hey, it's probably unlikely you'll step on as a clown because we got 5 generations of clowns.
Correct.
Aerial work, was that what you were?
Yes.
The very first role there, huh?
Sure was.
Yeah, I had at the beginning of that season explained to everybody that this was going to be my last season. That I was tired of the circus and I was stuck in a rut and I needed to go do something else.
Because you've been breathing fire and cooking and taking care of personalities and.
I've been taking care of personalities for years. Yeah, the fire eating only happened the first year. They paid me way better just to be the cook for the following year.
Okay.
Yeah, they needed to cook much more than they needed to perform.
Well, we all have a very bad habit. We like to eat.
Now your last name is Cook, right?
And so it happened to work out. When I started telling Tavana Luvis, the office manager at the time about this girl that I was talking to who was interested in being on the circus. She was very interested. She saved her cook and her CDL driver by hiring a showgirl, which she also needed. And yeah, we would continue on Kelly Miller for a following 2 more seasons. And John Ringling North II at that time would decide that he needed to put it up for sale. He was 80-something years old at the time and needed to retire and be in one spot for a period of time.
Yeah, because he, even though his age, he spent a good chunk of the time going from town to town, just like everybody else, in a very humble motor home.
Wow.
There was no frills. He was very down to earth, and he worked just as hard as everybody else did, and he sat through every single show, no matter how treacherous the weather, to make sure that everything was just as he always envisioned. That's what he wanted to make sure, that everything was just so to keep the circus well preserved and go on for the following seasons.
So tell me, we have some great history. We know how you've entered the circus and how Andrea joined, how you guys met. There has to be some amazing people that you met along the way. So tell me a couple of those outstanding personalities, performers. We know that you drove into some amazing communities. And so share, because you were saying you're going to stop off and see one of the clowns here in the next...
Chico the Clown, who I never really actually worked with, but he'd just appear at random at these different shows we would be on, and he'd help with setup and tear down. He'd invite you into his caravan for a pint, right? He's got a Punch and Judy act and a calliope built into the back of his truck that he pulls his caravan with. And he is about the happiest go luckiest person I have ever met. Brian LaPalme introduced me to this man years ago. And everybody that I know in the business knows Chico the Clown. Armando Loyal, the elephant handler, who's married to Natalia Fusco, has a phenomenal family. His son Christian was the clown for Kelly Miller Circus for years while we were there. Oscar Tavo and Tedo Perez were these amazing brothers who were the managers of Kelly Miller for the duration of the time that Andrea and I were working there. They made that show run. They got all that equipment through all that mud. There'd be power lines in the way. There'd be unfit lots to set up tents in. And they figured it out every single time how to go forward.
How to Afro-engineer it.
That's right. Friedman Terrales and Castro were the mechanics. They had amazing performers like the Ayala family, the Poemas, the... Kat and Rachel Plunkett.
Wendy Bell.
James
Plunkett.
This is another circus we worked for. Another family circus. The Plunketts were fantastic. We only got to work for them for a short period of time, but we enjoyed every second of it. We followed them on Facebook. They go to small rural communities all over the country. And Mr. Gene Hembry, who's been a constant inspiration.
We love
He's
Mr.
this
Gene.
kindly old man who had a whole series of different businesses throughout his whole life. And it's probably even better than Big Fish, this person.
And this is what he would say. That's what I said. You'll remember that if you're watching.
How about you, Andrea? Some memorable people, acts, clowns in your history. They may be different than Jeremiah's. They're the same.
Steve and Ryan, the clowns, Mr. Oscar definitely, Wendy Bell, goodness. I'm like drawing a blank because there's so many faces. I'm like, oh, it's not on Kelly Miller, but Justin Loomis has nothing but been wonderful in every shape, way, and form. Brian Franzen and his charming self.
Yeah, Julio and Dea Rosales. and a lot of these people had raised families on the circus and had kids in the midst of all this work. And Kelly Miller Circus had hired a school teacher for all the kids growing up on the circus who would be surrounded by adults. And they would grow up speaking to only adults and only knowing how to speak that way and wanting to work and wanting to help everybody out. And they would know how to juggle and do handstands and all this crazy stuff at 8 years old, but not know how to multiply and divide. And it would be a very severe juxtaposition compared to what another person at
traditional education, right?
Right. Oh, I just thought of a couple. Mende and Zaya, the Mongolian couple. I can't pronounce I butcher their last name, but they were always gracious, always effortless, glamorous. They made the show just spectacular.
Nicholas Soren, his wife and his family.
Yep, they always did a really great job.
Yeah,
too,
the choreographer for Kelly Miller Circus was Mr. Fusco, and I don't even know what his first name is. To come to think of it,
it's always been Mr. Fusco.
Mr. Fusco.
His wife is Susanna. I know that. Yeah, Mr. Fusco, or Senor Enojado, as I always called him, because he always had the angriest faces.
Is there a lot, as you're thinking about all these people with the Kelly Miller Circus or the others, were there a lot of crossover between the larger circuses? Like if you were looking at Ringling Brothers or the
No, there's a
ones.
large crossover over the smaller circuses.
Okay, but
smaller.
there's not as many bleeding down.
There were some, a lot of people that were already well established that maybe Carolyn Rice wasn't she in Ringling Brothers as a showgirl, or a small trickle effect that because we were always told about these circuses that were multiple tents large, and the people would come flooding in, and as each year went by they got a little smaller and a little smaller and a little smaller. But definitely people are connected, and even if they weren't there, they knew a handful of people that were there. So even though they might not have been on that particular show, word of mouth, and they definitely knew who you were.
Gotcha.
Yeah, actually, the smaller characters would get around much quicker, in my opinion, than the bigger characters were. And Martin Gonzalez, who did a fantastic straps act, and he was a phenomenal stage manager, and he did prop boss. But lesser than that, like Red Cunningham, who I knew on Lewis and Clark, and who had tortured me to death. And then after I joined Kelly Miller and I do work for Carson and Barnes and Justin Loomis, I had forgotten that name completely until he showed up in the yard one day trying to let me forgive him for all of the trespasses I felt he had committed to me in front of all these people that I was trying to impress at the time. Oh!
The nerve!
Funny.
So I'm interested, and maybe we'll wrap up in a handful of minutes. If anybody has any questions, we'll kind of take those. So keep those questions coming. But give me a couple. Maybe we'll start with Andrea, then we'll go to Jeremiah. Give me a couple memorable, and I know there's probably hundreds, memorable things. I'm not talking about people, because we talk about people, but you might say, there was a show, and this is what happened, and this will sit in. I'll tell my grandchildren about that. What are some of those things that stand out with your history of the circus life? And you want to start with Jeremiah and come back to you?
Well, I'm going to say Mother Nature to start.
Okay.
She's a good player in all of that. Because we would always do shows, rain or shine. And, boy, we did. Working on in a traditional American circus mud show, it did not matter how treacherous it was. The show must go on. So, boy, we had tons of moments where you had to wear your mud boots that went up to here. If you were fortunate, you had higher, and you would just in your glamour sequins and wig and everything, you would go in the pouring rain and back and forth and back and forth. I can't think of one particular time, although I'm going to ask you a question in a moment. But rather if it was through extreme heat or rain.
Any snow?
I never experienced it, but he has. But I've experienced a lot of other things, so just goes to show you. Jeremiah, what was it in Illinois, the haunted house with the grasshoppers?
Thinking of Watseka, Illinois, with
That's
the Roth
it.
house.
Yes, with frogs and crickets
Huge
and
spiders.
snakes.
Oh, the
through this-
plagues.
Oh,
Yeah, the grass was really tall, and they did not mow it before the circus went and set up on it.
And so it was on a lot that there was a supposed real haunted house was located right there, and then there was a big grassy area, so it was just beyond, and they didn't tend the lawn very well, and so yeah, you'd have all sorts of critters jumping out at you, and I remember it, and it was startling, but watching the other guys' reactions was way better. Maybe that's just the haunter in me of going, okay, wait for it.
Now, if that happens, is that one of the things that's in the circus caravan? Like, oh, these people do not know how to cut a lawn. Is there a lawnmower or a tractor in the caravan in one of the trucks?
We kept
A weed
one
whacker.
weed whacker with us
Just enough that we
to
could.
spend
But that
half
wasn't-
the day cutting the grass down inside the tent if we needed to.
Yeah, that wasn't
Okay.
for our comfort. That was for the public.
Sure, because so they're not picking up ticks while they're coming to pay their ticket or whatever.
Right, but
How funny.
yeah, that was hilarious.
Jeremiah, what about you? A couple of those.
Okay, so
And if
there's
you have any others, we'll come back to you too.
there's
You
a
might
story
be-
right off the top of my head. We had about 30 guys that would get H-2B visas to work in America for the summer. And they'd come up from Mexico. And we would start our season off in Brownsville. Not because it was closer for them. They would all have to come up to Hugo, Oklahoma, and get the equipment and drive it down to Brownsville. There was one year in particular, and I want to say it was 2015. It was the year that we had met, that the H-2B workers were tied up in litigation, and they were not let to come into America yet. And there was 2 weeks there where we were 30 laborers short of setting all the circus equipment up and driving all the trucks. And a group of friends of mine had to bring some of the trucks beforehand, and Jason, Emily, Jean, and I want to say Jacob, but I'm not sure, will all remember that experience vividly, because all their trucks all broke down at different times on their 600-mile drive south from Hugo down to Brownsville.
Wow.
And after we got all the equipment there, everybody, Armando Loyal, the elephant handler, has a term. He says, when you're with it and for it, everybody that showed up there to the circus grabbed equipment and trudged through the mud and set up that circus tent and ran water hoses and electric lines and made it all work.
Yep.
And it was the performers, it was all the showgirls and office managers, it was the cook, it was the animal department. Everybody pitched in and put that bastard together that year. And for the first 2.5 weeks, we didn't have any of that extra help. And we were up till 3 o'clock in the morning. And because we were in Texas, after we were finally done getting the last bit of equipment to the next town, out of the mud and on the road, ready to go, we all went to Whataburger afterwards that Mr. North would pay for. And we stayed up for another hour eating food before we went to bed for 3 hours to go and get it all put together for the next day's worth of shows.
Wow.
2015 Kelly Miller Circus taught me everything what it was to be with it and for it. And there was a choice, maybe 2 people that were not with it and for it, and their season was miserable.
I bet. So, man, we could probably talk for another hour. We got any questions coming through here?
I have a question. So, and perhaps even from older performers, and looking at from the history of circuses, you know, so you have the Ringling Brothers, and then you've got these smaller circuses too. Has there been a lot of difference? You talked about going to certain towns and they've got cookouts and donuts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Is there a big difference in the response and the audiences to what you're doing as a circus performer? You know, is there the same joy? Is there the same, because, you know, with stuff that we've done, whether it's community theater or haunted attractions, that kind of thing, as you go into 2019, the society responds differently to things, but there's still that innate joy and nostalgia and stuff. Do you find that people are still just like happy the circus is in town? And are you getting the same positive responses as the kids come in, as the parents come in? Are grandparents bringing their kids in? Like, is it still just, yay, I'm watching a clown, or I'm watching an aerial performer, or, you know, a fire breather, or whatever it is.
And I'm under a tent, right?
Yeah.
Which is different than...
Well, we've worked on those shows that you're not in a tent. You're at a rodeo co-op or an outdoor arena where the seats are already installed, and we're just putting the show on there where the horses normally would be. And the answer is the response is different all across the board. Okay. And over the years, we feel like there's different influences for all of that. We've been to some major cities where we couldn't fit everybody in the tent. And people were very upset that they didn't get to see the performance. And the people that did get to see the performance were just absolutely ecstatic. And we've been out in the country where we've gotten even more people than in the major cities out in the country.
I would say that's very true, that in smaller towns where there's not as many things going on, or maybe they're just more excited with the festivities of what's going on, the town parade, or a cookout or something like that. The circus coming to town is a very big, exciting thing. And it is, as a performer, or, you know, one that brings the circus, it's up to us as well. The ones that are with it and for it, it doesn't matter. It's like any performer. It doesn't matter if you've had a bad day. It's time for you to transform and to show everybody how glamorous and exciting, and to bring the magic to them. And no matter how uncomfortable, because it was hot or very cold, there was no air conditioned, and even with a tent, if there's a hole in it, you might have a slight rain on your head. You know, it was up to us to make everybody have a good time. And sometimes it's like what Jeremiah said. Sometimes, you know, you'd have just a good turnout, and then other ones you couldn't cram enough people. But I will say it's very much a community thing. It's important for communities to stay connected, which was something that we saw, that people who were sponsoring the circus, if they were not tightly knit with the community, 9 times out of 10, we did not have a good turnout. It didn't matter how many flashy lights and what we brought. People didn't know because they weren't connected. And the circus too, everyone has to evolve with the times. So, you know, rather if it be Facebook or, you know, websites or
online marketing. Versus just the bill posters and the tickets.
It's up to everyone to keep up with the times and still keep it classic, and to bring the joy to everybody. And all we've ever heard was, you know, oh, I'm bored. Well, come out and see and do and be, because, well, your couch is only going to get you so far.
What's the future of the circus? I mean, these are, you know, maybe opinions, or maybe they're somewhat objective. I mean, you guys have seen it years.
I'm excited that you asked that question, because we've seen what the future of the circus is. It's no longer these enormous 5 rings. It's no longer the huge big top tents. It's going back to where it originated from, which was small communities and small families traveling across the country providing that entertainment. And it would only be up to 15 or 20 people in those groups. And those groups do everything. They're the performers, and after they change out of their wardrobe, they run up to the stands to sell novelties and sell concessions. Yep. and it's still good money if you can make the business work right for you and attract people to you. And sometimes that's navigating away from the large cities and going to smaller rural communities that would value that kind of entertainment when nothing comes through rarely at all, you know?
Yep, absolutely.
What about if we're kind of wrapping up here and you folks are well-spoken, you skip college for the education, the life education that the circus brings you, both business, both performance, both with people skills and marketing and performing, all those things. Any life lessons that creative inspirations or life lessons as we kind
Good or
of
bad.
wrap things up, because I know that just about, you know, a couple times we might get these really solid nuggets of advice that people walk away with. They go, if I remember anything, I remember this. Any of those? So the 4 words that keep ringing.
With it and for it.
So life is, I mean, is
Oh,
that it?
my
I mean,
gosh.
I'm hearing that, and so I've heard it from both of you. Is that part of it? And what else?
Do you have something you want to say?
Dare to be different and dare to be great. And nothing, whatever is the cut mold plan that might be for you, and the other ones, if it isn't, only you know that. And to not be afraid, because time ticks by fast.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely with it and for it, and to dare to be great and dare to be different, and to follow whatever your dream is. And, you know, it might evolve into something else, but usually it's bigger and better. So have a plan and be flexible and go for it.
What about you, Jeremiah, as you wrap things up?
My father always said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And so if you can be adaptable and flexible, that's an enormous thing. When I first joined Lewis and Clark, Bob Childress asked me, can you drive a truck and trailer? And I admitted to him, no, I cannot. I've really never driven a truck and trailer before, but I'd be more than happy to learn how to do it. So he put me in this truck and trailer, and he said, listen, the only 2 things you need to remember are you can go too slow down a hill, but you can never go too fast. You can go 100 times too slow down a hill, but you only go 1 time too fast down that same hill. And the second thing that he told me was, remember, it's only 10% show, but it's 90% business. It's all in how you carry yourself.
And remember to point your toes.
And always
smile.
point your toes.
So with that, I mean, that is great advice. Thank you, guys. This last hour and 5 minutes feels like 5 minutes.
Yes.
It does not feel like an hour and 5
Nope.
minutes.
Oh my
that's for
goodness.
sure.
What we'd like to do is thank you everybody for joining us today. Your stories are engaging. I will watch this at least 2 other times. Feel free to share it, folks. The Tuesday at 7 is out. We're just having creative conversations. We're connecting people in the creative community from all over the United States, and we have folks watching from different parts across the world as well. Thank you for joining us Tuesdays at 7, and keep an eye out because we have some amazing interviews coming up as well. And just when you thought you knew which way we were going going to go someplace else. So
You go your way, I'll go mine.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
see you down the road, right?
Yeah.
Classic circus adage right
See
there.
you down the road.
See you down the road. And so with that, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.